What's going on, guys? Thank you for tuning in to episode 2 of the MDs2B Podcast. My name is Richard Zhao.
My name is Teebro Rahman.
And my name is Ashish Nicodemus.
And today we are going to be going over the interview process at medical schools.
So seriously, if you guys have made it to the stage, big props. This is probably one of the hardest stages of the whole application process to get to, and we can't express enough just how proud of you guys that we are if you have made it to this stage, because that means you guys killed it on your MCAT. That means you guys killed it in your undergrad classes or your post-bac classes. Yeah, that means you guys killed it in your extracurricular activities, and you proved to that admission committee that this person can handle the academic rigor of med school. Now they just want to know about the easiest part of your medical school application, you yourself.
Yeah, kind of going along with what Teebro is saying, your interview kind of determines at this point whether or not you're going to get accepted into the medical school of your dreams or not. So, getting a little bit about getting an interview. If you're offered an interview, that should mean that your scores are good enough to get past the minimum threshold. The interviewers are going to give you the opportunity to show the AdCom who you are as a person and how you interact with others and keep your composure under pressure. So a lot of the times they'll ask you some off-the-wall questions just to throw you off and see how you handle it. So some other interview questions can involve your extracurriculars, your hobbies, or your life-molding experiences. Talking about these experiences can show the AdCom what you've learned as an undergraduate and the things that you'll bring to the med school. Many medical schools are shifting away from selecting students with just high MCAT scores to selecting students who have really good interview scores. So it's really important to prepare for your interview, and we're going to give you some tips on how to ace your interview, as well as give you some questions that you should be prepared to answer.
Before we jump into those tips, though, I want to focus on something Ashish said a little while ago about how a lot of interviews will ask you off-the-wall questions that you might not be prepared for. I remember in my interview, the interviewer asked me one question that wasn't even remotely related to medicine. She asked me, what did I think about Snapchat, the app? And that's pretty common that you'll see. These people, once you're at this stage of the application process, they know that you're academically competent. They know that you're probably likely to be able to handle the rigors of med school. What they want to know is, can you handle the rigors of holding a normal, casual conversation with someone? Can you be the doctor who, when a patient's having their worst day, can just sit down and talk to them like a human being? That's what they care about. Well, did y'all have any weird questions during your interviews that just kind of like threw y'all off?
I remember during my interview, I got asked, what was the last book that you read? And I felt like that was a pretty unique question to ask that maybe not everyone is prepared for. What about you, Ashish?
I did get asked one question where they asked me if I was a color, what color I would be. Where it did confuse me for a little bit, I think I gave a good answer that reflected my qualities as a student and as a compassionate physician in the future. What do you think about it, Teebro?
Yeah, it's always those off-the-wall questions that will throw you off. While I was preparing for the interviews, there's a bunch of really good books that I would actually recommend. One of those books that I prepared with being, it's called the Pre-Med Playbook Guide to the Medical School Interview. Now, I have no financial affiliation with that, so I'm just endorsing that on my own recommendation, but a really great book. And one of the questions I remember asked was, if you could be any country, what country would you be? And there was other off-the-wall stuff too. And these were based off real questions that kids had gotten in interviews. And a lot of these times, these questions aren't meant to get a definite answer to, because how is there a definite answer to what color you'd be or what country you'd be? They just want to see if you can have a casual conversation. They want to see if you don't just immediately explode when someone asks you a question that you weren't expecting. These are questions that they just want to make sure that you're someone besides the answer choices that you prepared ahead of time for these interview questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, speaking of interviews, interview day is such a big, crazy topic. Probably the most nerve-wracking day of my life. What about you guys?
Yeah, same. So the night before the interview, I did not get a wink of sleep, and I went into the interview not sleeping for 24 straight hours. So what do you think about it, Richard?
Yeah, I definitely remember being just as nervous. I mean, we had the same interview day, so it was a little comforting to be able to walk into the building with someone that you're going through the entire process with. However, I think the biggest thing that I had to keep in my mind was that the moment that we set foot on campus, we could be being watched by, random passerbys, by janitors, by people working at the desks. So it's always just important to be mindful of your behavior at all times. Assume someone is watching you as soon as you step on campus, and always be professional, be kind to everyone around you, and just be prepared to, give the whole day your best shot. I've even heard of some schools, leaving trash by the trash cans, and employing someone to watch people come in to see if you pick up that trash and put it in the trash can, or if you just walk by it and act like you didn't see it.
And yeah, which is what Richard was saying. It can be nerve-wracking because it is one of the biggest days of your life. But at the same time, remember that school wants you there. They wouldn't have sent that invitation out to you if they didn't believe in you and they didn't think that you have a real shot at becoming a great and contributing member of their next year's class.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would recommend that you go into the interview day with full confidence because you know that they want you there.
Like I remember for my interview day, I walked in, I drove up, and I remember being so nervous. My hands were jittering, my teeth were clattering, and then I see in front of the medical school, they have a little billboard with all the people who were interviewing that day. They said, "Hey, welcome, blah blah blah, so and so, welcome to the school." And immediately I realized, they want me here as bad as I want to be here. So I'm gonna enjoy it, have a good day. And the way that these interviews typically go is applicants all gather together in one central room, and they give you a short overview of the school. And for mine, they just brought in some lunch and some upperclassmen to talk to us one-on-one about the school, just so we could get a kind of behind the scenes look at the school from the perspective of the students. Is that what they did for yours?
Yeah, they did the same thing for us. They had a little time before the interviews actually started, but they gave a little background about the school, the history, and we could talk with the other interviewers that day. So just a little time to get acclimated to the new environment, as well as to get comfortable with those interviewing you and those interviewees that day.
And also, when they bring the students in, most of the time the adcoms will just leave the room. So in that case, just ask whatever questions you have for that student. Ask about the community. Ask about how competitive it is. Ask all the questions you want to ask to the students. Take advantage of that time. Don't just let it go to waste.
Now, moving on to the actual interview part of the interview day, there are a couple of strategies that you can employ to sort of better prepare yourself to answer tough interview questions in more of a formulaic manner. The first of which is AIDIT. This is sort of what you do at the beginning of the interview. AIDIT is spelled AIDET. It's a 5-letter acronym to sort of remember how to introduce yourself at the beginning of the interview. Basically, A stands for acknowledge, so you want to always greet your interviewer with a smile and a handshake and try to address them by name. Especially if there's multiple interviewers, you want to go one by one, shake their hand and say, "Hello, Dr. or Mr. or Mrs., whatever their name is." I stands for introduce. This is where you introduce yourself by telling them your name and your background without rambling on about your resume. Duration is just a simple statement telling the interviewers what you're going to be doing during the interview. For example, throughout the duration of this interview, I hope to show you how dedicated I am to the field of medicine, why I would be a perfect fit for your school, etc. E stands for explanation. This is sort of explaining how or why you are here, what you hope to gain from this interview, what you hope happens afterwards. For example, I hope through this interview you get a better understanding of who I am, and I can also gain a better understanding of who you are. And finally, T stands for thank you. Always be sure to thank your interviewers just for taking the time out of their day to interview you and the rest of the incoming potential medical students. This AIDIT as a whole sort of just gives off a good first impression to your interviewers. It's not something that everyone is going to do when they're applying, so it definitely gives you somewhat of an advantage in terms of just coming off as more professional, more grateful for this opportunity, and ready to get into the interview as if you've prepared for it already.
So now on to actually answering some of the interview questions. So a lot of the interview questions will include questions about specific times or experiences in your life. And one way that I kind of like to go about it is by using the acronym EARS. That's EARS. So E stands for experience, A stands for action, R stands for results, and S stands for skills or strengths. So I kind of use this acronym when answering questions about different experiences I've had in my past and how they'll make me better in the future. So one example of how I do this is, for example, if someone asks you a question about name a time where you displayed courage. So this is where you could use E and A, which is experience and action, to kind of explain an experience where you showed courage. So say you stood up for a friend. The experience would be standing up for your friend, and that kind of goes along with your action. R would be the results. So you could say that the results of the experience were that I gained confidence in myself, and I could instill confidence in my friend by standing up for him. And then the S would be the skills or strengths. So the skills or strengths that you would learn from this experience could be leadership, bravery, and being able to stand up for yourself. And you can kind of transition this into how this will make you a better medical student or a better physician in the future. So ears, you don't have to do it on every question, and not every question warrants it, but it's a good way to give your answers a little more depth and let your interviewer know that you know how to answer questions to the fullest rather than just giving a surface answer.
So seriously, guys, keep track of the information Rich and Ashish just went over. It is vital in making sure that you can be the best applicant and the best interviewee that you can be. So that's perfect for the standard traditional interview. Typically keep in mind that will often be with an MD, but you might not have your interview with an MD, so don't be thrown off. It's not uncommon or unheard of to have your interview with a PhD at the university or have your interview with a third year or a fourth year medical student. Just be prepared for whatever happens. So I'm going to talk about one other part of the interview process, or a possible format of the interview process you guys might see. It's called the multiple mini interview style. So this is a style that I personally went through for my medical school. It's a little bit different than the traditional typical interview. The way that this works is you have 6 stations, about 6 to 10 stations, and each station will have trained actors, or it might just be 1 or 2 stations that have like a faculty member or like a regular interviewer there. And at each of these stations, you'll have about a couple of minutes, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, sometimes as long as 15 minutes, to just act out these various scenarios that they'll tell you for each of one of these stations. Now, prior to each station, they'll give you a little flashcard, and you have 2 minutes to look over the flashcard. The flashcard will typically have whatever information on that station that you need to know. For example, you might see a scenario telling you, okay, you're about to go talk to your friend who has been skipping class a lot recently because their girlfriend broke up with them. So talk to them and counsel them through the situation. And then when you enter the room, it'll be an actor who will very convincingly play the role of your depressed friend, and you have to talk them through just as you would talk to your regular friend if you had a friend going through that situation. Now, I know all that might have seemed like a mountain load of information, and that might seem a little intimidating, but honestly, MMI interviews can be an amazing time. Just because you aren't limited to the one-on-one format of a single interview, and you don't have to worry about maybe you and that one interviewer not connecting, because you have so many different types of scenarios for those MMIs. There's no big trick to MMIs, it's just act as you would in those situations. Employ the values of empathy, employ the values of body language, nonverbal communication, employ the values of listening. If you just actively participate in that conversation, if you listen to what that person is saying, make them feel heard, and speak to them as if you would speak to your friend or whatever scenario you're in, you're going to do amazing on those MMIs. And other types of scenarios that you might typically see are you are playing the role of a physician, you have a patient who's trying to get a drug medication that they can't afford, or it might be you are a counselor and you're speaking to a patient who has just found out they have a terminal disease. How do you handle it? Either way, it's just testing to see how you can break down these scenarios and how you act in these scenarios.
One final tip I'd like to add is before I went into my interview day, I had been creating a list of all of the things that I could possibly bring up in an interview. This list included basically all of my extracurricular activities and hobbies that I had throughout my undergraduate career. Things like playing music, volunteering at certain dates, certain doctors that I shadowed. And the night before my interview, I went over these notes. Even the walk over to campus on interview day, I went through this short list of things that I could possibly bring up, just so that you always have sort of an arsenal of things that you can bring up in your interview.
Just to add on to what you were saying, Richard, this is a really good tip. It's to really know your application front and back. Because during my first interview, my interviewer pretty much just pulled up my application and went down the list of my works and activities as well as my personal statement and just asked me to go into more detail on each one of them. So it's important to know what you put down for your works and activities, because if you go to interview day and you don't know what you put down on your own application, it could look really bad. So make sure you know your application front and back before you go into interview day.
And finally, I would say make sure you have questions for the interviewer. If you have questions, it shows You're not just another applicant, you're someone who's researched that school specifically. Try to avoid general questions like, when do you guys start clinical rotations, which is pretty much the same for all medical schools. It's the third year. Try to go for specific questions about that school, like say, what is one thing about this medical school that you really like, or ask for opinion-based questions like, what is something about this medical school that you wish that you had while you were attending medical school? What's the community of this school like? Do you see students typically helping each other, or do you see them being more competitive with one another? Show that you have an interest in that school, and those interviewers will greatly reciprocate in how much they will value your application.
And that's basically it for the interview day. Be sure to remember, rate it whenever you're going through your interview. Acknowledge, introduce, duration, explanation, and thank you.
And also make sure to remember EARS, which is experience, action, results, and then the skills and strengths that you learn from the experience.
These two tools, honestly, are what helped me the most through my interview day. It makes it a lot easier when you have a basic structure that you can follow for most answers, and it helps you answer questions that you might not be prepared for, or maybe you might just have to go straight off the dome for. They're just really helpful tools.
And ultimately, remember, the school wanted you there. They want to know more about you as a person. This isn't where you should be talking about your academic achievements. This isn't where you should use it as an opportunity to keep bragging about yourself academically. This is where you show the school what kind of person you are beyond all those stats and all those numbers in your application. Show them the values that you have. Show them that you can care and you can be a communicative person.
All right, and to finish off, just make sure you know your application like the back of your hand. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode where we talk about how to study for the MCAT. Thank you.